the choux pastry, and we will be doing this on Tuesday and Wednesday. The puff pastry, which is available on the other demo, that will either happen at the end of class, where we will spend some time doing puff, and the main product that we're making Tuesday, Wednesday is choux pastry, right? So it's a new choux pastry. I'll go a little bit more into theory once I've produced it. So if you have a look here at the group of ingredients, we've got eggs. We've got the liquid. In this one, it's water, milk, butter, and then we've got then the flour. Okay, so it's a very, again, basic ingredients. Choux pastry is the only pastry that we make that has a cooked base. So it's a little bit different than the other pastries where we were talking about gluten protein. In this case, with the choux pastry, we actually cook out the protein. Remember, protein coagulates, starches gelatinize, and that happens at a temperature between 80 and 90 degrees. And that process will be complete in the base. And this base is called a panade. Now you can see I've got the butter here. So step number one, you've got your liquids and you've got your butter, and you're going to put it over heat on a wide base pan, right? Remember I spoke about making sure that you don't have a pan that is too small. We really need a fairly large surface area. And what I want to do with this choux pastry is I want to melt the fat and not bring this to the boil, right? The water content in this choux pastry is part of the recipe. And so one of the problems in and around making choux is that if you bring it to the boil, a rapid boil, before you add the flour, then you've got the issue of you're taking too much of the liquid content out. So I always make sure that, yeah, I heat it up, it's hot, and it just comes to the simmer. So I'm really looking to make sure that these little chunks of butter, whatever fat that you decide to use, and you can use commercial fats, but we have been consistently using natural-based fats. And I'm just making sure that they're completely melted in this first part before I add the flour. So you can see that it's just starting, it is actually starting to steam. This is an individual task as well, so everybody will be making choux pastry. So now it is just, all the fat is melted, it's hot, it's steaming. It's you can just see now, it's just come to the simmer. So I'm going to turn it back to the pilot, right? And the reason for that is I'm going to add the flour while I've taken the heat source from this. And this makes it a lot easier to do this part. So now I put in flour. And I'm going to mix this through. And it's nice, and it's a lot easier to do this when you don't have a direct heat source. And I'm going to blend this through, and this is now called a panade. P-A-N-A-D-E, panade. And this is a fairly standard base for also doing some chef concepts like, gravies, mashed potato. There's a lot of concepts where they will use this panade as a base. So you can see that it's clear. And now I'm going to cook this panade until I have that gelatinization and coagulation. So I'm going to turn it back on the heat. And it's a fairly high heat, as long as the heat doesn't exceed the pot. And I turn it like a pastry. So I'm stirring it, turning it over. And what will happen is it'll get shiny. And the signals or the visual cue for when this is ready, when it's reached that temperature, where the starch has coagulated, sorry, the proteins have coagulated and the starches have gelatinized, is I look at the color on the bottom of the pan, waiting to see that the fine layer of panade on the bottom of the pan will start to color. And that is a visual cue that your panade has reached the correct temperature. So you might not be able to see, and I don't know if the steam is affecting the camera on this demo, but I am just starting to see just around here a little bit of color. And the other thing that should happen is that it should be free from the base. Meaning it should be nice and free. It's not oily. It's not separated. It is one mass. And you can see just here that I'm just starting to get a brown color. So that gives me the indication and that it can move freely off the base, that my panade is the right temperature. Now I need to cool it down. So I've got my egg content, and I need to cool this down to below 40 degrees because I don't want to cook the egg whites, particularly, which is protein, in this process, because now we're relying on the protein in the egg whites, in these eggs, to give us the required coagulation and structure that will hold that choux pastry in place. So the protein, which is normally what we rely on for structure on other pastries and breads and things, that has already done its job, right? Now I'm relying on the eggs. And that's why choux pastry is that really sort of like I always explain it like a balloon. You know, we're going to pump it up full of air and bake it and dry it. And then we obviously fill that with creams and, you know, different mousses and jellies. For this, I'm going to use the bowl and the beater. Sure that's stable. And I'm going to place this now into the machine. Now this mixture now will go onto the machine where I will cool it down to 40 degrees and then start adding my eggs one by one. Just moving this over just so you can see what's going on. So just using first speed. Whether we can see what's going on, but I'm going to start with first gear. And what I'm doing here is I'm just feeling the bottom of the bowl, and I'm using my temperature, my body temperature essentially. So if you're a healthy human, you should have body temperature of 35, 36, 37, somewhere around there. And I want to get this panade mixture to 40 degrees. So I'm just essentially just touching the bottom of the bowl, and I'll use that as a guide to when this is ready for me to start adding eggs. Now, once I start adding eggs, that is emulsification. So I have to use a higher speed than first gear. Now, don't add the eggs when the panade is too cold, because that will over aerate. This is mechanically aerated choux pastry. It will over aerate. So really, it's one of those tasks where you, as soon as you've got that temperature, or that, that goal of getting in and around, between 40 and 50, then you will start adding the eggs one at a time. So I've reached that temperature, and now I'm going to start adding eggs one at a time. So 1 egg. Now, you want to make sure that as soon as that egg has been incorporated, you add another one. This shouldn't take a long time. So I'm adding another egg, and it'll become slightly separated, and then it'll come back together again. Another egg. It'll become slightly separated, becomes incorporated. Then I add another egg. Now, the important thing for now it is a choux pastry. See if I can get a better view in there of that. Another egg, let it become incorporated. Mix it, it starts to clear itself from the bottom of the bowl, adding another egg. Now, what I would like everyone to do in class when we're doing this is that you're going to hold back the last 2 eggs. And that is where we're going to make a determination of whether it has enough liquid to be pipeable and to be a choux pastry. And I'll take, so I've got 3 eggs left. Add my, and I've now just got 2 eggs left. Going to fully incorporate that. Now I'm going to give it a scrape. Sort of doesn't look yet like choux pastry, and it will definitely take those other 2 eggs. See that it looks, it's still not a pipeable mass. And give it a scrape. Add another egg, and this is critical. I can't, if I add too much egg, and it's always plus or minus, it really depends on how much of the water has evaporated during that cooking process, how effective you are at making that panade, as to whether you will use all of that egg content. It's looking nice and shiny now, and it looks like it is now getting close to being a pipeable mass. Going to clear it again. And now it looks a lot more like choux pastry. But it will still take another egg. So we'll take all of the egg in that recipe. Make sure everything is in there. It also has to do too with flour. you know, how strong the flour is. Hear it again. Scraping, as I've been explaining, as we're making recipes, is a very critical part of blending and mixing to make sure that all of the ingredients are in the bowl. Now I'm going to, once I'm happy with the amount of egg content and the consistency of the choux, I'm going to set the timer on second speed on mixing, and I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. And I'm going to just let that beat to make sure that it is fully incorporated, that the egg content is fully blended through that choux pastry. So now that that's just finishing the mixing, so I've made the panade. Step number 1, collect your equipment. Then you will weigh the ingredients. Then you will make the panade. Then you make choux paste. The equipment that you need for this, got it here. Now I'm using a just a infrared thermometer. You can use that for the bowl to make sure that you're reaching that temperature. Piping tube, plain, that's for the profiteroles, the Paris Brest, and this is a well, this is an eclair tip, actually a fine comb eclair tip. You'll be using a star tube. Then I've got plastic scrapers and a couple of piping bags. Now we will be using some paper for guides. You can see here there's one for your Paris Brest, and there's also one for eclair. This, we are using silicon mats, right? And I'll explain in class why we're using it. Paul, would you be able to grab me a gastronome tray, please? Could you grab me a gastronome tray, one of those little fine ones? I'm going to give it another scrape again. Just one of the little fine ones. You know, the shallow. Yeah, shallow, please. Yeah. Now I want you to use the same processes we've been using before, as far as making custards. If we cool this down, it is going to be easier to pipe because it's got fat. See, I'm going to give it a good stir. You see it's shiny. And we use a few systems to see that it has the right amount of egg. One is we're just going to cut through the center and look at it as it forms and closes the gap, how long that takes, right? But that can only come from experience. The other way is to grab some on your spatula. And this is called a drop test, right? So I'm going to grab some of my spatula and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I wait to how long that takes to drop off. But probably the best tip for this when you're making it is you want to look at the choux and make sure that if you pipe it, it's going to hold its shape. It's always possible for me to add a little bit more egg, right? If it's a little bit too tight, but you can never come back, right? Once you're committed, once you've got the egg in there and you've put too much in, you pretty much have to start again. So for us, we're going to go onto a gastronome tray and we're going to cover that with Glad wrap. We'll put it in our fridge and that will actually become firmer. It'll be a firmer material so that when we pipe, it holds its shape. Right? And that's a really important part of choux, is that when we actually pipe our shapes, we're able to do that. Just now going to pipe the shapes. So we're doing Paris Brest, eclair, profiterole. So I've got my tip for the profiteroles, and I've got my bag and tip for eclair. For the assessment, we will be making the eclair and the profiteroles. The other thing that we'll be doing just for class for the next 2 days, we will also be doing a thing called Ace and Honoré. Let's cut this bag a little bit more. The other thing too is just when you're cutting your bags, make sure that your tip is fully exposed. Right? You're going to make sure that when you're piping, that the tip is and the bag is secure. I'm just going to pipe the shapes now so that we can complete this. Don't overfill your bags. So now I'm going to pipe my eclairs. So I've got my piece of paper underneath there, which will guide me for piping. Connect down, pipe. When I get to the end of the line, stop, pull, and just drag back. You want to make sure that all your piping with choux pastry, I'm piping on an angle so that I get a really nice full shape. Don't pipe them too thin. It'll be impossible to fill them. An air bubble there, that's normal. All right. And I'm piping, there's the line. I'm going to just pipe just on the side of the line so I can see it the whole time to guide me to keep them nice and straight. We'll probably do 9 eclairs, so I can just move that paper up. Now I'll do the Paris Brest. We're just doing 6. So I've got the line there. I'm just going to follow the line. So pipe around. And I'll do those. So out of this recipe that we're doing, we will get 9 eclairs, and we'll test and see how many profiteroles. So with our profiteroles, we're going to do a pastry called religious. A religious is another traditional pastry, like an eclair, like a profiterole, has a historical history, and it's in honor of the Pope, believe it or not. And it's a really nice, it means that we can do 2 flavors. So profiteroles, going to do 2 different sizes, a small one for the top and a larger one for the base. So again, starting at the end of the tray, working back towards yourself, right? If you're not tall enough, Start in the middle of the tray, pipe towards yourself, spin the tray around. All right, so I'm going to do the smaller profiteroles now. Pipe, drag off. Pipe, drag off. I'm making them too small and pretty much trying to keep my pastries consistent in size. It takes a long time to be able to pipe consistently. You can see I'm not piping directly down. I'm actually piping on a little bit of an angle. So pipe, inject, get the shape, and then drag off. So they're my small ones. Now I'm going to do slightly larger. Not too much larger, but just a little bit larger. I still want to bake them on the same tray. Just slightly larger. Now we've got a few other products to do with any leftover choux, but essentially we will have one eclair, 6 Paris Brest, and the profiteroles. Right, I'm just going to share now our PowerPoint. Just to conclude and just to show you the PowerPoint that we'll be using in class. So you can see on the far right, that's religious. So 2 profiteroles, and that's actually got a shortbread, which we call crumble choux or crackling, that goes on the top. Yeah, let's just get choux down first. We'll revisit that in petit fours. And the other picture there is, of course, the Paris Brest. Paris Brest is a pastry that was made by a French pastry chef in the town of Brest, B-R-E-S-T, to celebrate the bike race and that sort of, what's that bike race? I can't even remember the name of it now. The Tour de France, right? And therefore now it's globally, everybody knows pastry, it's a Paris Brest, right? So it's like a bike wheel, as you can see. That's what we're making. So we're doing choux pastry. We'll be making the custard again. Everybody, well, we'll be working in teams of 2, so we need a custard. We'll be whipping cream this time to make a cream diplomat, which will be the filling for the these pastries. I'll just click past this because I'll cover that in class. Right, this is the sheet I'm after. Okay, so important points. We've got the 4 ingredients that we're using in a choux pastry. We've got flour, baker's flour. The fat that we're using is butter. We're using whole eggs and water. You can use milk. You can use salt. You can use sugar. You can add small ingredient amounts in there. They will just be for flavor, maybe a little bit more color, but essentially you can make a choux pastry from those 4 basic ingredients. The function of ingredients. So we've got 2 functional ingredients in here. We've got, well, 3, 4. But let's just talk about the flour and the egg. So we need the flour to make a panade. We need that water content to hydrate the starch. The fat gives us a very pliable material. Once that comes to that temperature range, which is about 9, between, let's call it, you know, it is 86, but let's go from, you know, 90 to 100, right? Let's just as a general rule. The starch in the flour will gelatinize and the protein in the flour will coagulate. So the flour protein, in this case, the gluten, plays no role in the structure of the choux. And what I mean by that is that when we bake it, when we form that shell, gluten plays no role in that. We're relying on the protein in the egg white to provide that structure. Making the pastry, so it's a panade. Once we add eggs, then it's a choux pastry. The key points for that is temperature, right? So you don't want to go too much over 50 degrees on that, adding the eggs, because the egg whites will actually cook, and you'll get little chunks of little cooked egg white through your pastry. So we make sure that we bring that pastry, that panade, down to 40 degrees, second gear, and then we emulsify the egg content in there. Piping the batter. So once the choux pastry is produced, it'll go into a gastronome tray, cover it with plastic like we've been doing with all the custards and things like that. On the floor of your fridge, we need to cool that. It'll make it easier to pipe, easier to get your shaping correct. We will be piping our shapes, and then we will then obviously go into that baking phase. I'll cover that in class. Really, it was for me to introduce that first part so that we're all seen it at least once before. You'll know the references when I say a panade, choux pastry, and the reason why I'm adding those things in there. So on the other side is they're all the important points, 1 to 10, that we need to know. Don't forget, this is an assessment event, right? So meaning it's an assessment product that we'll be producing. So there's the choux pastry recipe. I can omit the milk. I can take it out and just go with water. It'll make a leaner pastry, right? The more fat and things that I load into the choux will give me a thicker wall, and I'll talk about that when we're doing quite heavy mousse fillings into choux. You need to build a little bit more of a robust, material, which is the choux pastry, to hold those things. But essentially, we'll be using that base recipe as far as the volume of liquid, fat, and flour. And there's an alternate recipe. You can see just water, butter, flour, eggs. All these recipes work. That makes a leaner pastry. And then you've got this in your books as well. So Paris Brest, and there's got the number of the tubes, the finishing techniques, the profiteroles, and also the eclairs, the pastry cream, and chantilly. You can see here now with the cream diplomat, we'll be making a custard, but you can see with the cream diplomat now, we have a weight of cream going into the custard. And this is just a guide that we need quite a heavy type of material to go into the eclair. The eclair type will be coffee caramel with a very acidic fruit jam. And yes, those things do go together, believe it or not. Then we've got just the decorations, which I'll cover in class. Crumble choux. We probably won't do this time, but we will definitely visit this when we do petit fours. And that again is just a very fine shortbread that sits on the surface of the choux pastry, raw choux pastry, and it's baked together. They're the products that we're making, the 3 products. So we've got the final decoration. We will be dipping our eclairs into chocolate with a bit of shavings and a dust of icing sugar. The religious will be dipped in fondant, and the Paris Brest will be dusted in icing sugar. Again, that is the timeline of making choux. And this is very useful when you're working out your workflow for the assessment, right? Because we have got the puff pastry added in there, and the puff pastry takes a bit of time. So there is windows of production that happens in between that, right? So there's a little bit of timing involved. Again, I'll guide you through that. Just a bit of theory on the choux. So replacing the water and milk allows for a thinner and richer choux pastry. Choux pastry can be gilded, brushed or sprayed with butter for a very shiny and smooth baked surface. So we will actually be spraying the top of our choux with oil for exactly that reason. So it remains pliable and elastic, and it can expand without cracking. Choux pastry can also be frozen raw. Raw choux can be also placed onto silicon mats, baked actually frozen, from frozen. Choux pastry can be piped and blast frozen. Choux pastry can be made, piped, baked, and frozen. So it's one of those products that is very versatile for us in patisserie as far as production of it. And choux pastry is also one of those products where you can actually make it not with gluten, right? So gluten, it changes a little bit, but you can actually make that panade with cornstarch and make the choux pastry gluten-free because we're not really relying on the protein to give us the structure, right? So that's one of those products that you can swap out the flour and make it 100% gluten-free, which is interesting. Choux pastry can be deep fried, which is churros. You know, there's a whole bunch of, you know, innovation in and around that. What is a panade? Panade is formed by mixing and heating of the first three ingredients, the flour, fat, and water. The water and fat are brought to the boil. Well, we just brought it to the simmer. Take a bit of care about how much water you evacuate off out of the recipe. The flour is added from the pilot. Take it off the heat, add your flour, blend that through totally, then kick on the heat and then cook that panade. It is important to make sure the fat is completely melted before adding the flour. Continue stirring until the mixture leaves the side of the saucepan. Cooking the panade correctly is the very important key of a choux pastry. And again, adding eggs, cool below 50 in order to add the eggs. Gradual additions of the egg is important. The aim is to produce a stable, smooth dough that is silky, shiny. And you will see this all the time in patisserie. It's like our products, when we're making them raw, need to be shiny. Mousses, cream, pastry. If it's not shiny, that means that there's something wrong. Like it's not emulsified normally, right? If it's dull, if it's separated. So we really want to see a really smooth, shiny, elastic type mixture. The aeration of the choux, really important point to understand how this actually works, right? So the method of aeration for choux is mechanical aeration. That word physical that's up there, that's a commercial cookery term. Physically, mechanically, I'm mechanically putting little tiny air pockets into that choux. Like, we're in the business of putting air bubbles into things. Bread, pastry, everything's got air pockets in it. And it's really important to understand how that works. You know, when I don't know whether you do remember, but and I'll always come back to it, that wheel of aeration where we've got chemical, mechanical, yeast fermentation, lamination, which we're doing with the puff pastry. And then you've got a combination of methods, which we're doing in the next unit when we do croissant, where we're using fermentation and lamination together. When choux pastry bakes in the oven, any air that has been incorporated during the beating stage, and you hopefully will remember 2 minutes on second speed once you've got that choux pastry in the right condition, because now we're going to beat air bubbles into that choux, very tiny. When the choux is in the oven, the water in the pastry turns to steam, right? Once it gets above 100, that water turns to steam. This expands the air and the steam as it tries to escape from the paste, but it's stopped and trapped and retained in the pastry by films of coagulated gluten, which we had done in the panade, and uncoagulated films of egg albumin, right? So we're trapping those little pockets of air as it expands. When we get coagulation, we're holding those thousands and thousands of little air pockets with the uncoagulated egg protein and the coagulated protein in the gluten. The egg albumin is extensible and will inflate and will, like a balloon, right? And the inside pressure and gases and airs, they will expand in the oven, and it literally is like a balloon. So our choux pastry will slowly expand. It'll hold that air, and there lies another critical point, is then we have to make sure that the pastry is completely dry. All the water has been evacuated out of that choux pastry, and the form is set. If we don't do that, it's like a balloon, it will collapse. And we don't have a choux pastry that we can actually fill. Towards the end of baking process, when the choux pastry has reached the full volume, the protein in the eggs have been coagulated, right? They're set. We've set the structure. I've mentioned before that there is a special feature in the choux pastry batter, and that is the fact that the starches in the flour are gelatinized prior to baking. It's the film of uncoagulated egg protein in the choux pastry in the initial baking stage that are critical to obtain the volume that we need to fill and decorate this product. Again, more important points, I'll cover them in class, but it's worth having a look at this PowerPoint. It's on the team site. Let's go to the next one. I think that's the last one. So I will be seeing you in a couple of days. That's the end of this. Good luck, and any feedback on these recordings would be appreciated. Bye.